Every day we buy and rent products, and as consumers, we have more options than ever at our fingertips. And you don't even need to get out of your house, as e-commerce has taken off in most of our globalized economies. Our products and materials travel all around the world until the final product is in the shop where you can buy it or rent it. However, this increasing offer of products has developed closely together with a huge uncertainty about the origins, the journey, and the impact that these products and materials have on people and our planet. Is it the consumers or the producers' responsibility to address this information gap? Why and how do we do it? My name is Laura Franco, and I am the Learning Engagement Manager here at the MacArthur Foundation. We are a UK-based organization that works with businesses, policymakers, educators, and designers to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy. As part of this mission, we host sessions just like this one. Before I introduce my two brilliant guests this morning in this session, I would like to remind you at home that this will only be a real conversation if you get involved. So please put your comments and questions in the platform where you are watching this video on, and my colleagues behind the cameras will pass them on to me. So without further ado, let me introduce you to my two guests in this session. First, Louise Garvin, Head of Projects at Provenance.org, a B-certified corporation using blockchain technologies to get, verify, and bring supply chain information to consumers. And Gordon Renouf, the CEO of Good On You, a company that helps consumers make ethical choices through increasing a product's transparency. Welcome to this session.
Good morning.
Thanks, morning, good to be here.
So first, let's start with you, Louise. What got you into this topic? Why is it something that makes you feel excited?
So I love the stories behind products, which isn't really a surprise given I come from a graduate of manufacturing engineering and the daughter of a farmer. So kind of knowing what goes on behind the scenes, the details, the designs, the decisions, has always been an area of interest to me personally. But I spent a decade in strategy consulting. So thinking and working with kind of retailers from around Europe and North America, primarily, and some of the brands as well. And so I guess over that time, it was a lot of digital transformation. How are we going to shop in the future kind of work? And actually, all this new data is not really giving customers any real choice in terms of what matters. And so really, that's kind of how I find myself at Provenance. So I've been here for a couple of years and getting to really think about that problem and thinking about getting the data and the information to make better choices behind the products, and I guess share the stories of where they come from with people. Yeah.
Great, Louise. What about you, Gordon? Why is this topic something that makes you that is interesting for you?
So I spent many years as a consumer advocate and standing up for consumer rights, and some of that time was at the peak Australian consumer organisation, which is called Choice, and similar organisations like Which in the UK or Consumer Reports in the US, UCF Choisir in other countries. And the idea that consumers have a right to know how their products are made seems to be really important, and to many consumers. So consumers want to make choices that are aligned with their values, their pro-environment values, their pro-ethical production values, but it's really hard to do that. And so I guess I set myself the mission of trying to make it easier for consumers to make the choices that they want to make, that align with their values, to be more conscious of the impact of their consumption on the environment and on other important causes, social and animal issues.
Thank you. And for those who are watching us and that are not familiar with the work that Provenance and Good On You do, could you, Gordon, explain to us a bit more about what Good On You does?
So Good On You is, sorry?
And what Good On You is as well.
What kind of organization? So Good On You is a small social impact company, and our mission is to provide consumers with information about how the brands that they shop impact on the issues they care about. So we're the world's largest consumer-facing database of how fashion brands, clothing brands impact on people, planet, and the animals. And we do that by believing in the obligation of companies to be transparent and provide accurate and concrete and specific information that can be used to evaluate their impacts. And so Good On You has an app where you can search your favorite brand and where you can discover new brands that do better on the issues that you care about. You can get the same information on our online directory, and we have a journal online where we give a lot of advice about how to be a more sustainable fashion consumer, which brands are doing better, what's the impact of particular materials, and so forth.
And Gordon, why do you focus on fashion?
Well, you have to start somewhere. We were looking, when we started, we weren't necessarily committed to fashion. We were trying to make it possible for consumers to shop their values, to understand the barriers to consumers making the choices that align with their values, and things like they don't have the information, they don't know what the issues are. Some products cost more if they're more sustainable sometimes. They're not necessarily in the mainstream stores and so on. And we wanted to address that problem. We couldn't do everything at once. And we were looking for the kinds of products that consumers buy reasonably frequently, but also the kinds of industries where there are significant environmental and social issues that need to be addressed. And fashion clothing makes up, there are various estimates, and some are larger than this, but I think the most robust estimate is something like 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, for example. Fashion uses 25% of the world's pesticides. Fashion has huge amounts of waste. The volume of clothing that we consume has, I think, tripled over 10 or 15 years. So fashion is really where a lot of environmental impacts are being felt, and it's a good place to start. It's not the only area of consumption which has important sustainability impacts, of course. Energy use and travel and so forth are very important too, but we had to start somewhere, and this seemed to be the right kind of place for the kind of model that we were developing.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I think Louise will agree with us as well on the importance of the fashion industry. And Louise, can you tell us a bit more about what Provenance does? And as well, can you give us a little bit of information about what industries do you mainly work with?
Yeah, sure. So I guess Provenance kind of vision is about enabling impact-led commerce. So making sure that great products come with the information that matters, around origin, people, and processes. So that's kind of what we're focused on. And I think, what does that look like then in reality in terms of what we're up to? Provenance started life as a kind of spin out from our founder's PhD, which was looking at blockchain's applications in supply chains. And really, I think, transparency has been at the heart of what we're doing. So at the core of what we're up to is both software, so providing businesses the tools to connect, organize their supply chains, find out, but to kind of gather that kind of network information. And then we spend quite a bit of time, both within the software and within the services we offer, to get people to think about how the supply chain differentiates you. And we'll use our kind of tools and frameworks for that. But a big part of what we're doing is around publishing this information, because if the consumers can't get it, and those other people who are kind of aggregating on behalf of consumers can't get it, then it's kind of lost. So publishing this information is the kind of key goal for us, and we work with businesses at a variety of stages, some who are at the start of the transparency journey and trying to work through what that looks like internally, and some who are ready to kind of really champion this and talk about where their products are from with confidence. So we've got publishing tools. At the heart of those, is integrity, because we have a kind of proof model where we want businesses to disclose with proof why they can make certain marketing claims, because I think what we're sitting on at this point in time is a kind of purpose wash, green wash, call it what you like. Mm-hmm. We know that this is kind of an emerging trend, so that's part of what our tools are kind of forcing you to kind of commit to something with some integrity, so that you're getting the benefit of being transparent. So that's critical. I think that fits into how we use blockchain. So we use blockchain selectively to make sure that there is untamperable evidence behind some of the claims in these supply chains, but we can get into that later. And I think, we also spend quite a bit of time from a consulting point of view, just helping businesses navigate the world of transparency. It is a journey. It's not about just switching transparency on. It's about changing how businesses communicate internally and how they share this information onwards to consumers. So I guess we work across a variety of sectors, and food has probably been the place that's been leading for us for a while. I mean, they've got a lot of the infrastructure in place, both from a risk management point of view. They've kind of set the standard on that. But increasingly, one of our kind of big areas of focus at the minute is in the beauty sector, where actually we have way less of the regulation that the food industry has, but actually a huge appetite from consumers. And there's a lot of confusion, a huge amount of noise, and it's massively in need of having transparency in that industry. It's complicated out there, and there are big marketing terms like clean that don't mean anything. So so that's kind of where we are from a sector focus.
Thank you. And we'll be talking a little bit more about some of the examples of the brands, businesses that you work with very soon. But I would like to first come to this question of whose responsibility is it to address this information gap? Because we've asked our audience online that when they were signing up to get a reminder to watch this session, to answer one question, and I would like to know what our guests' opinion on it is. So the question was: some would say that change won't happen unless customers' habits do. Others would argue that all our products should be made so that there are only good choices for the customer. What's your take? Gordon, can we start with you?
Well, I think the first thing is that setting up oppositions like that isn't really helpful. I think we achieve change in an imperfect and stepwise manner, and every incentive we can create for producers to make better, more sustainable choices is a good thing. And so that will include, in certain cases, government regulation. That will include pressure from investors. That will include companies wanting to please their employees. And that will include consumers making choices that create advantages for the businesses that are doing the right thing. And so I think we spend a little bit too much time wondering if consumers will act, or even blaming them for not acting. In my research, it's quite clear that the majority of us want to take action to varying degrees that is good for people, planet, and animals, and with doing the right thing, provided that they can also meet their own needs. And so I think it's really crucial that we think about it as the consumer having a right to consume responsibly. So for decades now, we've said consumers have rights to information, they have right to safe products, they have rights to complain if something isn't working. And I think it's about time we started saying consumers have a right to consume sustainably, they have a right to consume responsibly. And that right means that producers primarily, but also those who impact producers like governments, should do what they can to empower consumers to choose the better option.
So what are the, sorry.
I was going to say, that's why, good on you, we're about giving you information about, ideally about every brand in the market. So as we're doing fashion at the moment, we have 2,500 brands rated. We're working towards a target of 10,000 or more. And so that's you as a consumer can find a product that meets your functional, style, price, whatever needs, but you can also understand where it fits, where it sits on a scale of being a leader or a laggard, somewhere in the middle in terms of its impact on the things that matter to the planet and the things that you care about.
So what are the most common barriers that you think we need to overcome for consumers to be able to buy better products?
Absolutely, great question. The first one, I think, is that consumers need to be aware that something's an issue. So I think many people are aware that climate change is an issue, that waste is an issue, that poisoning our environment with pesticides and so forth is an issue. But there are some other things which we were not very aware of, say, 3 or 4 years ago. I think people are becoming aware of issues like microplastics harming the oceans and the animals that live in the oceans, fish, for example. But it wasn't much, there wasn't much awareness around that a few years ago. So I think there is definitely a role for organisations, including Good and New, but also including campaigning organisations, to build awareness that a particular thing is an issue that we would want to address to protect our environment. The next one, though, is knowing, and this is where Good on You comes in, knowing which companies and brands and products are the better choice to respond to those issues, and sort of knowing which issues are perhaps more impactful than others with a particular product category. We get things like Louise mentioned greenwashing, and we have this danger that people say, producers that is, say, we can be good at this thing, so let's be good at it and tell people. But that thing isn't actually very important considering all the other impacts of their product. So that's why when we assess brands, we look at all the sustainability impacts that are typically relevant to the fashion industry or even products of a particular type, so that the consumer can be perhaps confident that even if the brand is, talking about how their packaging is really great, and ignoring the fact that they have significant impacts on climate change and chemical pollution, say, in their supply chain, that those will be taken into account in a good on you rating. So we've talked about awareness and information about brands. Obviously, price is an issue. There is concern that in some sectors, not necessarily all, the sustainable or ethical option can be more expensive. That can sometimes be true, and there's a few responses to that in terms of our way of thinking about clothes, for example. We could perhaps talk about that a bit more. There's also the fact that if consumers are favouring the better brands because they now know which ones are better, those brands will increase their market share and their opportunity to scale and reduce their unit costs to bring down the prices somewhat. And a final one I'd like to mention, that's not the only one, would be habit. So we as consumers develop habits, and so we buy the same thing all the time. It's not so much an issue in fashion, but it's definitely an issue in food and other things you buy in the supermarket. You go in the supermarket, you just grab the same thing you always grab. And so we need some way to sort of break that cycle in consumers thinking about maybe moving from this product to that product. And perhaps that's where retailers can play a role, in particular, in making alternative, better rated products more obvious, accessible and appealing to consumers who are stuck in habits.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks for that comprehensive analysis of the barriers that we face as consumers. What's your take on this, Louise?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of that, Gordon, I completely agree with. I mean, it's not about pitting these systems of change against one another. It's going to take all the incentives and mechanisms we've got at play. We look at what things like modern slavery legislation has helped motivate, thinking right to repair legislation is hot in the news today. Those things are super duper helpful, but it's also policy in some ways is a blunt instrument when I'm trying to shop with my values because they're quite personal to me, and it would be quite complicated to figure out how my values fit into a complex supply chain system. That's not going to be I think, a spot for policy to play anytime soon. But that's really, I think, where both Gordon and I come at this from a transparency and providing the information that allows you to, I guess, play with your own mixing desk of what matters. Is it the price button? Is it the values button? Is it social impact? Is it environmental? We are making complex consumption decisions. And yeah, in the grocery store, that's not coming in with us, and we're not prepared to give that level of thought against those. So there'll be policy and there'll be retailers then having to act on behalf of the consumer to do a little bit of that filtering and that sorting as they kind of curate the ranges. That's how retail's existed. They've been great at curating us products that we want to buy at prices we want, but actually that evolution for retail in the next 10 years is about actually starting to represent more, that curation takes on a slightly different aspect, and that will be with new data that comes out from the products and the makers and the marketers to tell a more believable story around some of these things, so that we can kind of motivate consumer change from that side of the world as well. So yeah.
Great. Most of the people in our audience agreed that it is a combination of both, although there were some people that were aligning themselves together, quite closely together with only one of them. They did make a point about the barriers. They mentioned some of them, especially that it's easier to make choices when you have the money and the resources to make more informed decisions and to be able to choose better products. There was also some comments about things that may enable these kind of things, like the role of governments, laws and regulations, and the role that education has to play in in informing consumers and prepare them with the right mindset to receive new circular products. My favorite point from the audience was a comment that someone made saying, a systemic change calls for a systemic approach, which will require us to activate all the relevant levels, aligning efforts and reinforcing results. Moving on to the next topic, I would like to ask Gordon, who are the biggest winners of transparency?
In terms of brands, I think to say something more broadly about transparency is that in the last 6 years, we've seen a really fundamental transformation in the attitudes of many people in the fashion industry. We've moved from a situation where your supply chain was your private proprietary information that you would share with nobody. And now the Global Fashion Agenda is reporting that 60% of brands are moving in the direction of transparency. I mean, that's in some ways good, in some ways bad, that 40% of brands are actually not making much of an effort at all. But I do not think we'd be anywhere near 60% of brands 6 or 7 years ago. I was really struck at a conference when G-Star, Raw, the denim brand, were talking, and they said, like 12 years ago, we would not have thought about being transparent, but now, the last 5 or 6 years, we cannot imagine doing business in a different way. And it's not to say that these big brands are being as transparent as they should be, or addressing it. I mean, beyond transparency, you actually have to address the issues and not just be transparent about where you're failing, but actually work on fixing it up. But so, there are some other larger brands like that are addressing at least some parts of the puzzle. But in terms of really being transparent, there's a few smaller brands that have made it their mission to build their brand entirely around transparency. I mean, I can think of 2 quite small Australian brands, ABCH and Arnsdorf, who do a fantastic job. Basically, you will find out where every button came from in ABCH's products. But there are other brands of a medium size like EcoAlf and Nudie Jeans and Armed Angels, who are all getting out there in terms of building brands around identifying all the things they should do to be more sustainable and communicating that honestly with the customer. So, I don't want to really single out too many individual brands, particularly big ones. There are some that are doing some parts well. I think it's more an interesting comment is that the industry as a whole has moved quite a long way. And there are some standout small brands, but we need the practices of those small brands to become the practices of the large brands before we're going to see real change.
Thank you, Gordon. And we're getting some really good questions from the audience already. I would like to move on to talk a little bit about how you bring this information to the consumers. So, Louise, let's start with you. You mentioned that you use blockchain. I'm sure you get to explain what blockchain is many times. And so, please, I would like you to jump in and just give us a 30-second explanation of what blockchain is.
I think I'll start with a quote from John Oliver, the renowned thinker and late night chat show kind of guy. But he said blockchain is about everything you don't understand about money combined with everything you don't understand about computers. So that's the kind of space we're playing in. But really, what is the blockchain? For us, it's the next phase of the internet. We see it as kind of Web 3.0. We started in a world with, you've got a computer and a database and the 2 are connected. We then have moved through what we call Web 2.0, where we've got an interconnectedness, where we've got networks, the Facebooks, the Googles, we've got kind of controlling agents that network us, but there's a central body as part of that kind of network system. And Web 3.0 is about the decentralization of that network. Blockchain at its heart is just a different way of building a database. It's a database that sits across multiple, many computers so that it can't be hacked, it can't be tampered with. So I'll not go any more complicated than that, but it's really about a kind of different network of information that has a different level of trust behind it. So we use what's called the public blockchain, in Ethereum, and that's about putting facts. So we don't. There's different approaches of how blockchain is being applied into supply chains. Some people are just putting all of the data into the blockchain, and it's kind of like just doing the same stuff, but in a slightly different way. We're much more focused on taking small amounts of validated information to build a trusted network of information that can drive new decisions. So whether that's, we've done work in tea supply chains in Malawi, where we're collecting data that didn't exist before on smallholders, but actually that trusted data around a smallholder can be very powerful for them accessing a financing system. But that's putting information on a different technical system that is more trusted in terms of blockchain. So that's kind of what it's at the heart of that bit of technology, but it's really about using a different data system, I guess, the data system we believe of tomorrow, to put facts and proof points on the chain in this public environment that means that people are accountable in a slightly different way than we've seen before.
And how do you bring this information to consumers? How can they access it?
How can they access that? Because not everybody can read blockchain. Fair enough. Yeah. So we work with businesses quite often to kind of surface what those differentiators are, what those proof points are. So we'll go in and we'll work with businesses to find those facts out, and we'll work within their supply network to verify those proof points. So there'll be a third party who's saying, yes, that's true. Now that could be an auditor, a certifier, a supplier, for example. It could be a data system, because actually there's lots of data confirming that things are true. That could be satellites, all those kind of different partner networks that can feed into information around that. So once that goes into our system, we use our publishing tools to put that into any really digital environment so that consumers can access that information. We've got some of our business users are using our products activated off the product. So the product itself carries a kind of digital passport about where it's been from, where it's come from, and what sits behind it. Other people will use elements of our publishing suite of tools and pop them into their own e-commerce environments, or put them into retailers' e-commerce environments as well. So that those differentiating points can be where the consumer's at when they're making their decision.
And why should a business be interested in, making their business model and the journey of their products more transparent?
So I think we can go kind of from the consumer side of things, where we've seen this information be pretty positive from a nudge factor point of view. So kind of price and the kind of fundamentals of purchasing have been, are well-trained behaviors, but actually the presence of being able to show in a comparison environment the values around the product from a social or environmental point of view, they've kind of shown that switching behavior into better brands, so to speak. So that's kind of thinking about it from the consumer demand side. But actually there's a whole bunch of risk aspects as well, in terms of organizations understanding where their products are coming from and identifying their true impacts is such an important exercise. And so often we end up working with businesses trying to just get those teams communicating, because there is a knowledge gap where the marketers don't know how to speak to the makers, and they don't know what information needs to bridge that gap. So there is a kind of risk point of view of knowing where things come from, but also then this opportunity to push that into more fundamentals of brand strategy, really, in terms of creating more purpose in the business as a whole.
Okay, we have one question from the audience for you, Louise. Saitza on LinkedIn is asking, what are the limitations of these tools, since supply chains are temporally and spatially dispersed, not forgetting the number of actors involved when it reaches downstream?
Yeah, so I think managing the network is a key part of our challenge. I think Provenance started with the view that we could just lift all this data from around the world, from the open sources that exist, and we'd know more about products, but actually so much of it is stuck in the network of the supply chains. So I think a software approach is important because of the scale aspect of the network. I think different sectors have different challenges in terms of how fast product is moving through. But I think it's about having a kind of central place for a business to coordinate some of their visibility on what's happening within the network. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think so. And Louise, do you have any examples of any business doing a great job on this particular topic?
Yeah, we had the good fortune of meeting Niagara at one of the circular economy events a little while back. And I was just going to kind of show you a few of just kind of give you a quick run through of what we've been up to with them. I'm not sure if anybody is familiar with DSM Niagara. They are kind of pioneering a new approach to products. So what have we got up on the screen there? We got anything up there?
Present.
Maybe? Present? There we go. Well, yeah, so we actually ended up doing quite a bit of work with Niagara on carpet. So you might not know the world behind carpet or ever thought about where your carpet comes from, but the industry is pretty closed. And so we worked with Niagara to make the first transparent carpet. And really this I think speaks a little bit to the questions that have been coming in around policy and around the consumer demand piece, because actually this was as much a story about being open about where the carpet comes from. Carpets traditionally are made with all sorts of weird and wonderful materials and contain all sorts of weird and wonderful chemicals that have, a bunch of proven impacts to health. So what we wanted to be here is open about the materials that are in here, the processes that we put together to, I guess, be more accountable and to drive change in the conversation and within the industry and what materials are being used today. And so that has some of this work has kind of shaped a little bit of policy work in different parts of the world, but also bringing that through to consumers so that they're part of this buying journey of a fully circular PET carpet that was produced, that they're able to think about the kind of full ownership piece of once they've got it in their hands as well. So they're buying into a product that's designed differently, and then they've taken on the kind of responsibility to see that product through to its end of life. But I think what's interesting with these guys is that, Niagara have really wanted to come up with that view of treating materials like currency, and we can really only start to unlock the value at the end of life of the product if we can be sure of what went into it and that the authenticity of that product, of kind of what's been happening on the journey of that product. So we've actually taken this concept most recently with Niagara again into the world of mattresses. So I've learned quite a lot over the last little while, which again is about creating a fully circular mattress. So that product was launched in January. So that'll be coming to market pretty soon. But that's kind of thinking about being fully transparent provides the confidence to make different levels of kind of marketing messages and brand messages, but also being fully transparent enables the other actors in the supply chain to do the right thing with the product. And so in this case, it's making sure that the recyclers have all of the right information about what goes into this product and knowing everything about the components and how it kind of comes apart again. So this information is activated off a small tag on the product, and then you can kind of pull up the history and the record of what's in the mattress. So I think that's just one of the examples I wanted to share with you on that. I think there's other bits where we've been working in retail a bit of late, particularly in the beauty industry. I think one of the key things there is about bringing more accountability into the marketing claims that are being being shouted about. So we've been working with Cult Beauty recently to put what we call proof points into the retail environment. So what are the things that are differentiating this product? And they all carry some evidence. And just even that process of having to be open and share your evidence, or invite the third parties that work in your supply chain to confirm things. It's amazing how much that shakes out in terms of what people are willing and unwilling to say. So I think that level of bringing a bit more integrity to how industries are talking about what sets them out, particularly in a retail environment where you are being comparatively shopped, and making sure that the facts in that environment are real facts, not just kind of marketing statements, is quite an important role that we've been working on.
Thanks, Louise. Great examples. Let's move on to Gordon, and good on you. Some people might be a bit skeptical about the way in which you rate companies as part of your app and website. So what kind of criteria do you use to rate these companies?
Yeah, I'd love to answer that question, but I just want to go back to that question that was asked about the supply chain, because I think that there's a really interesting point. I don't think any one company or project can solve the problem of opaque supply chains. I think there's a lot of different initiatives that need to be put in place, and a lot of cooperation between industries. So it's really interesting. In fashion, for example, we have something called the Open Apparel Registry, which is encouraging brands to upload all their suppliers to one centralized registry. And so you can mix and match, and you can kind of confirm that this supplier is here and it does this and it has these processes and so forth. So we get some different layers of information. We have the super verified information, which might be done, but for a small number of companies, like by a blockchain system like Provenance, and then you get perhaps a slightly lower level of verification, which comes with certification schemes, and then you've got these sort of big data projects which can get to a kind of truth through the number of different data points matching together. And so I think that's a really important part of the supply chain, as well as is how companies need to work together, or how projects need to build collaboration into what they're trying to achieve in terms of transparency. Going to your question, I think what's really interesting is that there's different ways to do this, and some of them are sort of deep, where we go down to the micro level of what's been happening in the supply chain about one product or one range of products. And others are broader, where they're trying to get information about all the companies, all the brands, all the products that have certain characteristics. In our case, that would be all fashion brands. And the important thing about our methodology is that what we're trying to do is to bring to the consumer the combined expertise of people who know what the sustainability and ethical impacts are in a particular industry, in this case fashion. And so our methodology is built on the shoulders of giants, if you like. We've looked at the work that many organisations, from activist NGOs through to industry bodies and leading companies, are doing on identifying what are the impacts of each particular part of the supply chain, each different kind of material. And so we end up with a methodology which has the benefit of many, many expert minds saying these are the issues that we need to look at in the fashion industry, in the fashion supply chains. And these are the ways in which a brand or company can demonstrate the degree to which it is addressing that particular issue. And so there's something like 600 data points in the Good On You methodology that we look at, and we look for companies to be transparent to saying in precise terms what they're looking at, what they're doing rather, to address that particular issue. I guess a related point is that I think Louise's discussion of the role of retailers is really important. And yes, there are some smaller brands that are doing fantastically well, or some larger brands that might have one product line that is very circular or very ethical in some other way. But taking that to scale and providing a consumer who is comparing a range of products and making trade-offs between function, style, identity, price, and values, there is a really important role for larger retailers to adopt methodologies which help communicate to consumers what's going on. And so we're working with a number of retailers to try and provide that information to them so they can provide it to their customers. So rather than the consumers having to find out about the Good On You app or Good On You website, they would be in the shops that they're already going to. And so we have a project, for example, with the global fashion retailer Farfetch, who uses the Good On You methodology to rate its brands and then to highlight the ones that are doing well to their consumers in a conscious collection. So the consumer has more different ways to access the information about which brands are doing better. And we've got discussions with some other retailers going on as well.
And in terms of the future and the near future, what is next for Good On You?
Well, our first aim, of course, is to rate many, many more fashion brands and get that information to consumers, both in improved tools that we develop ourselves and also with partnerships with both major retailers and also other activists and civil society organisations that are campaigning and working in this area. And we've got an exciting partnership that we'll be announcing in April. The next thing then is to move the Good On You methodology to other product categories where it makes sense. So things like our user base, many millions of people use Good On You each year, and they're telling us that they want us to do this in the beauty personal care industry. What often the brands we work with also make homewares, and so very many similar production processes involved, and so we could easily extend Good On You to homewares. But then beyond that, there are other kinds of products that you buy from time to time, like electronics or bikes or gyms or all sorts of stuff like that. So probably a way before we get to food, but there's a very broad range of product categories that consumers use that have important impacts on the environment, that they're looking for information about which brands are doing better, which products are doing better.
Gordon, we have a question from the audience on YouTube that is this person is saying, in a scenario where there is still limited transparency about the story behind the products, what would you suggest consumers to look at when they have to decide whether to buy that product or not? And maybe your app can help here.
Well, our app can help if it's a fashion brand, it's one we rated, so that would be a good place to start. I think there's a complicated answer and a simple answer, I suppose, and for me, if a brand is not being transparent about the things that matter for the supply chain for that particular kind of product, then that is a red flag to me. I mean, if a brand says we've got really great packaging and they're making products with, I don't know, lithium-ion batteries in them, and they don't tell you anything about where they're sourcing those from and where the minerals come from and how they're disposed and what things they have in place to reuse the materials that are in that product at the end of life, then that's a red flag that maybe you should look elsewhere. But I guess the challenge is in some sectors, so many brands are not very transparent. And I guess you have to favour those that are addressing the important issues for that particular product category. So you can see in what I just said, it's quite hard for consumers, which is why we saw the need for something like Good On You to make it easy for consumers to know that the key issues have been addressed and the information is being provided about the relative performance of a brand on those issues.
Great answer, Gordon. And Louise, just as a final question, because we are running out of time, what's the most exciting thing coming up for Provenance in the next year or so? Louise? I don't think she can hear us.
I got too excited there. Sorry, guys, you lost me. Yeah, I think we are kind of going to be continuing to kind of push and develop what we call our transparency framework. And that's kind of the core of our language of how we look at supply chains and get businesses to be more transparent. So it will be developing that. Really, that'll be a kind of key thing. And that will touch on some blockchain strands. It will, again, kind of, as you said, Gordon, lean on the shoulders of the giants that are making all the kind of, particularly the expertise that sits across all these impact areas. There's so much going on in this space, and it'll be putting, really, as we evolve that over the coming years, that'll be a key thing for us.
Thank you, Louise, and thanks, Gordon. And thank you at home for watching this session. I hope you have enjoyed as much as I have. We have a lot going on as part of our live online events. Soon at 12 GMT, we will have a session tackling the question of what does the circular economy mean for international trade. So to find out more information, go to our website, macarthurfoundation.org, and I hope to see you soon.